Are you listening? Damn.
And welcome back once again to the Endurance Hour Podcast, episode 364. Alongside Kona coach Wendy Mader, I'm Dave Erickson. Glad to have you with us this week. A lot of variety of questions all over the board, from emails to chat rooms, and even the T2 Endurance Club on Facebook, which is a private group. Just request to join, answer a few questions, and you are part of the community of, I think, 700 strong. We're going to begin in there today, Wendy. This is about liquid nutrition, which I'm very familiar with. And when I race, I usually just squeeze gels into a single bottle of water, shake it up race morning, and that's my nutrition for the day for a half Ironman, for example. So I'm making sure I have 300 calories total, 900 calories total for the race. So the question here is, who uses liquid only or liquid and solid fuel to get in their calories while racing? Let's get your perspective first on how you fuel during your races. Let's go maybe a half Ironman for this example.
Right. So for me, I'm looking at grams of carbohydrate per hour, which generally is kind of I'm looking at calories as well. Mm-hmm. But after talking to Dr. Cindy Dallow, who has her PhD RD, we did a few interviews on the podcast with her. When I heard her talking about trying to get in a certain grams per hour, then I did my own research, and then I've looked at other nutrition gurus such as Dr. Stacy Sims. I think about grams per hour. So I'm thinking on that around 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, which is about 240 calories because there's 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate. Sometimes I'm on the lower end. So, I'd say I'm in the 200 calorie-ish range. I don't really go much above 60 grams of carbohydrate. And the reason is I got my sweat rate tested at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute in 2007. And what they did is that protocol was a 2-hour ride at your Ironman intensity, followed by a 2-hour treadmill run at Ironman intensity.
Wow.
And they did some pre-calculations with urine samples, and you had to collect your urine while you were doing this protocol. And they did all these had all these different variables. It was so long ago, I don't remember exactly. And I ate my Ironman nutrition, which back then I was eating around 400 to 450 calories per hour, which is probably in that upper range of 90-ish to 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And I did that with a power bar, the regular power bar, and water and Gatorade. And so, and probably a gel. I probably did a bar of gel and a bottle of Gatorade with water. And after all is said and done, based on my body weight, my intensity, and we were doing this at the temperature and humidity of Kona, they told me I was eating way too much, I was at risk for GI distress, and that, number one, I get all my sodium from Gatorade, so I've never had to really rely on salt taps or anything like that. And then they lowered my caloric intake to around 150 calories, which they suggested I take a gel, water, and a bottle of Gatorade per hour, which was rough, maybe not a full bottle, but anyways, they did these recommendations for me based on this test. 2008, I followed the protocol, and I had my best race ever in 2008, not just from the nutrition standpoint, but having that nutrition dialed in really helped a lot, because when I'm dialed in on my nutrition, it takes my mind away from the race, and I'm just really focused on, did I have my gel that hour? Did I have my bottle of Gatorade? Did I have my bottle of water? So I was really focused on every hour kind of doing an intake of what my nutrition was. And so that was very helpful. And then, so much has changed, and there's so much more science and research over the years. I really refer to now Dr. Stacy Sims regarding nutrition, and her research follows what I learned from Dr. Cindy Dallow. And I posted this article that she said about solids versus liquids, because for me it's all about, it doesn't for me, I don't feel like it impacts me whether I get my calories from solids or liquids. To me, it's all about making sure I get the appropriate amount of calories or carbohydrate. And I've really am not someone who's had GI distress due to nutrition. I've had issues where I've had lack of nutrition, like on the marathon portion of an Ironman, or I've gone too hard on a 70.3 ride or an Ironman ride, which has kind of messed up my nutrition a little bit because the pacing was off. Because when it comes to Ironman and 70.3, it's all about pacing and nutrition to have a high success rate of however you define success. And so I know my fault sometimes when I have a little bit of stomach issues or I bonk, it's primarily always, I can reflect on, it's always been I've gone a little bit too hard on the bike. And again, back in the day, that was before I used a power meter. And, a lot has changed since those bonking days. And so this was an interesting article that Stacy Sims wrote. So I posted it in the T2 Endurance group, and I just wanted to get other people's opinions on what they were successful with.
Yeah, Jeff wrote here, I'm 90% liquid nutrition. He uses a combination of, I don't recognize these, but Morton 320 plus Crank Sports E-Fuel. The E-Fuel allows me to increase or decrease calories depending on a number of scoops, and both are easy on the stomach, as opposed to what Katie says, that she's trying to get away from gels because she has stomach issues or feels sick when she has them. So unfortunately, if gels aren't a solution, they're so popular and they're out there. I wish she could, for her sake.
Yeah, and I want to make one comment about gels. For me, vanilla flavored gels are really the only things that work for me. I've taken like a chocolate flavored gel during the race, and it's made me feel nauseous. And I've also tried the berry gels during a race, which make me feel nauseous. But when I just stick to vanilla, it's like, for me, vanilla frosting, and I kind of want it. I kind of enjoy the flavor. I'm fine with vanilla. So really, really texture and flavor definitely will impact what you can tolerate, I think. It's weird.
Yeah, I usually just, I've been a goo guy for the longest time, just liked goo. And those chocolates are so thick. It is like almost a cake frosting, but thicker.
Yeah.
It's a little too much. But I'm a vanilla bean guy myself.
Totally.
Stephanie writes on this same topic, I use Infinite Nutrition 100% on the bike. It's a custom blend just for herself. I didn't know you can do that. It's kind of cool. And then she has, this is smart. This is smart for anybody, whether it's your bike computer or your watch when you're running. I have the bike computer beep every 15 minutes, so that's when I know when to take a sip. And that's how she does her liquid fuel. She likes it for several reasons. It's custom to her. She doesn't need to fumble with gels or waffles, and she doesn't need to think about what she needs to fuel with, and she just makes a concentrated mix and then fills it up with her water. I do like the break of having waffles just to have something to chew on every once in a while, just to feel like you have something in your stomach on the bike, which I'll do maybe an hour before the bike ends for a half, for example, just to have something a little more solid. And depends on what time of day you're riding or what the conditions are, warm gel mixed with the water, isn't that tasty? It's okay first thing when you're on the bike, but after a while it's like, this is warm, yucky nutrition water.
Yeah,
but
I agree. And I'm also a solid person. I like to eat. Like, I like the chewing. I like just the whole process of eating. And speaking of warm liquid, back in my early Ironman days, I met with a nutrition person, and she recommended that I take a Boost or an Ensure and have that in my special needs bag.
Yep.
And I used to do that, and that's important to like freeze it before you put it in your special needs bag, because a warm Boost / Ensure is really gross. But back in the day when I used to eat whey protein and stuff like that, that was actually went down really well to get that at halfway through the bike. And to drink it was, but it wasn't Gatorade, but it was like a meal. It was a good combination of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. That was a really good suggestion back then.
Yeah, I've heard that from people in my circle that they used to, and I don't know if they do it anymore, but they would have an Ensure right after the swim for the first part of the bike, just to get some really good calories in them for an Ironman race, not a half, but an Ironman race. And I did freeze my water bottle, the little handheld water bottle that I put in my jersey for my last race, and it was a combination of liquid IV, just more flavorful water and water. It was only like 6 ounces or something like that, but it was cold on the run, which is nice. And I kept it with me, and I just refilled it with aid station waters or whatever along the way. So that's an interesting topic. If you want to join in on that conversation, there's about a dozen comments or so in that. So T2 Endurance Club, join in and give your 2 cents on how you are when it comes to liquid or the combination of liquid and solids for your fueling. One other one, this is going to tie into a question I have for Wendy, and it has to do with, how much slower are clip-on Aero Bars as opposed to, the regular ones that are meant for a tri-bike. And so I'm just going to read here what Kirsten wrote here. This is your friend Kirsten, isn't it? That you do your challenges with.
Yeah.
She says she rode a road bike for the first 16 years of triathlon, and it is so much more comfortable than any tri-bike she's ever had. You're only as aero as you can maintain an aero position. On a road bike with clip-ons, I could stay aero for the whole Ironman. I haven't been able to do that since I get two different tri-bikes. Since I got two different tri-bikes?
You know what? I loved her comment because I felt the same way where I rode a road bike for 16 years before I got my first tri-bike. And I used to throw on, back in the early days, my first, probably 5 years of racing, I would just throw on a variety of different kind of Aero Bars, like the day before my race. Sometimes, like, if you bought, like, the two, sometimes one would fall off, and I'd be having to hold it on.
They would twist forward and back.
Yeah, and so it's not something I recommend, but again, back then I learned a lot, and it was just some very good learning opportunities. And for my very first Ironman in 1997, I used what's called Spinacis, which are little tiny, like Aero Bars, little tiny ones, and they were made for road cyclists, like the Tour de France riders. And so if you're a road biker, you remember what Spinacis were. And that's what I used for my very first Ironman. I didn't even have Aero Bars, and I had a road bike. I had a Lightspeed Catalyst road bike back then. And so I think, like Kirsten said, you're only as aero as you are aero for the time you're on the bike. And I think comfort is really most important when it comes to what bike you're going to use in a race and whether you're going to use Aero Bars or not. If you're doing a very hilly course, a sprint or an Olympic half or full, a road bike it could be more appropriate than a triathlon aero geometry bike. If you're on a flat course, definitely I recommend the aero bike. And again, I posted an article with this question, and in the end, if you read the article, it does say that the clip-on Aero Bars will make you more aerodynamic. They're not going to slow you down, and so that's a good option. It's a better option to throw on some clip-on Aero Bars on your road bike rather than just ride the road bike in a road position for aerodynamic sake.
I just typed this in. I was just thinking about this with based on a conversation I had before my last race, and then what you're talking about here. I was curious about at what speed does it matter if you sit up on your your bars versus staying in the aero position. And I remember the talk was maybe around 14 miles per hour. If you're at 14 miles per hour, stay in the aero position because you're still getting some advantage. Anything less, if it's 10 or under, probably doesn't matter. And so I typed that in here, and the question was, at what speeds do aerodynamics make a difference on a bicycle? It says here, this is based on somebody's blog. At speeds over 10 miles per hour, aerodynamic drag becomes the dominant force of resistance. So over 10, with no wind on a flat terrain. At 18 miles per hour, it becomes 80% of the resistance. 25 miles per hour, it becomes 90% of the dominant force. So for those of you who aren't comfortable or want to sit up while you're going downhill, it's like, oh, I'm relaxed. I got a chance to coast down this hill and get free speed. I'm not pushing any watts. If you go at 18 and you sit up, 80% becomes resistance. So if you can stay lower, then you're going to be, moving farther along than someone who isn't at your same size and position probably.
Yeah.
Did you know that number approximately around 10 miles per hour?
No, I would have said 16. I know there's data out there, but I haven't thought about it. So I'm glad you did a search because I did a same search after you mentioned it and I got the same response. No, I would have guessed it was like 15 or 16 miles an hour, not 10 miles an hour. Yeah,
so that when I was being told 14, stay down, it's like, okay. And I did stay down. It was hard to because it didn't feel like I'm going that fast at 14 miles per hour, especially if you're kind of just cruising along at a gradual incline. It was a smart move in the end. Okay, so this dovetails into my follow-up question I had for Coach Wendy, is that I'm taking off my rear race wheel for training purposes, and then I'm considering keeping that training wheel on for an Olympic distance race here in about 3 or 4 weeks if I just decide to do it. And what are your thoughts on that adjustment for an Olympic distance?
So regardless of being an Olympic distance race, I think it's fine. So the reason I say that is, again, back in the day, we didn't have all this aero equipment. We didn't have all this equipment that gave you, what I consider free speed. Now, like, I don't even own race wheels. And so now I always will race what I'm going to call a B or C race, a less important race, a training race, whatever you want to call it. I'm always going to do it with my regular wheels that I train with heavy duty tires and tubes and all that to prevent flats, because of my purpose and my why and my reason I'm doing these lesser important races. And then for the big ones that I'm really going to compete, I will rent wheels or borrow wheels from a friend, and I always feel like they make me faster, they're lighter, they're more aerodynamic, and I save them for the big day, because for me, that's my why. That's my most important investment, is that 1 or 2 races a year where I'm going to invest in a little bit more gear to get that free speed. So for you, I say why not? I mean, you also did mention before we started the podcast, you're going for, how many watts can you produce during this Olympic distance? And so you're going to produce the same amount of watts whether you have an aero wheel or not.
Yeah.
But the aero wheel at, let's just say, 200 watts is going to make you faster than a non-aero wheel at the same wattage, possibly. Because again, you still have to train. You still have to put in a certain amount of intensity and volume of training to hit a certain pace and speed. And if you're not doing that, then all the aerodynamic stuff is not going to do what it should do for you. So that's my voice on that.
I should have done a little more research. This is one of those thoughts that just popped in my head before the podcast, but here's one little paragraph, a couple sentences on drag. And hopefully this makes sense. It's a deeper article here, but I'm just picking out one thing that I think makes sense. It says here, a key factor we need to consider is the drag area, which is the product of the object's drag force and its frontal area. Using aero wheels has been found to reduce a cyclist's drag area by 3 to 5%. So if you generate, in this example, 350 watts of power, using aero wheels could see your speed on the flats increase, and they got kilometers here, 44.6 kilometers per hour to 45.4 kilometers per hour, which is only an increase of 1.6%. I don't know if that's enough. And again, they're talking about some big power numbers here.
Well, it goes back to what I just said. If you were to sustain 200 watts, if you have an aero wheel, you're going to go a little bit faster at 200 watts than without the aero wheel. And at the same time, it all goes back to, what's your why, what's your goal, what's your reason for putting the aero wheel on or what's your reason for the race, number one.
Yeah.
And to me, most of the time, the aero wheel is going to have a carbon frame, so you have to put on carbon brake pads. And I'm not going to do that by myself, so taking it to the bike shop and having them switch out the brake pads and switch out the wheels takes time, takes effort, takes energy, and sometimes I just don't want to deal with that until I know this is, a really important race for me. Then I put in a lot more time and energy and effort into making everything as perfect as it can be. Mm-hmm. So for your sake, I say no. Just keep the training wheel on and see what happens.
Yeah, and when I talked about that I'm going to work on watts, I just want to see my watts. The goal is to get some good data, even though it's only going to be for an Olympic distance, because my next race after that is a full, so they don't really equate, but it'd be interesting to see what I can hold or what my average would be after that 25 miles. We'll see. I don't know. And obviously the racing aero wheels are lighter, so there's a little bit of an advantage here. But I don't know if we always when we talk about these different pieces of equipment, it usually makes the biggest difference for those who are, or those people who are very elite, who are the ones who are trying to make these smaller gains, I think. By the Aero helmet, the wheels, all these lighter components, in the end, they care more than I think you and I should, well, not you, but the average age grouper should care.
And I agree too, because this is their job, this is their profession, this is an aero helmet, wheel, whatever, sock. They have aero socks now. It could make a difference between thousands of dollars and their placement. And I think it's definitely a worthwhile investment if you have the investment, time and energy and monetary value to do this. But at the same time, if you're not putting in the volume or intensity of training that's going to get you to reach your potential, then the gear could just be a Band-Aid, and it's not the fix. It's not the reason. It's not the reason I'm going to go and shine at my next race. It's the reason I'm going to go and perform well, or you or anyone else out there. It's because of other factors, internal factors, and your whys and enjoyment of the process and the challenge and achieving your goal, regardless of what type of equipment you have.
I could out-train you and still go faster, and you have all the highest level equipment in the world. But if you train, 80% less than me, or 20% less than me, I still should out-race you because I put the training in. I mean, you look back in the 80s or early 90s of the pros, and they didn't have the best equipment. They had clip-on Aero Bars in the early Ironman days, and they still had amazing times. So, and they had funky equipment. I mean, Anyway, I'll move on. Let's get to some other questions here that were messaged to us. This is from Michelle. Michelle is competing in the age group nationals in August. And right there says a lot, but the rest of this kind of confuses me, Wendy. And she's debating whether to rent a tri-bike or road bike. She says, I've never ridden a tri-bike before, yet she's competing in the age group nationals. Would you recommend sticking with what I'm used to for race day, or is the learning curve transition to a tri-bike not too bad? I could try and rent a tri-bike and train on it before nationals, but there doesn't appear to be many rental options in my area. Thank you for your thoughts. Am I a little off base here? I'm being confused?
No, I read it the same way. So first of all, she's going to nationals. That's awesome. That's exciting. And at the same time, qualifying for nationals, you generally have to finish in a certain percentage at a USA Triathlon sanctioned race for sprint or Olympic to qualify for nationals. And at this day and age, I mean, I hate to say anyone could qualify for nationals, but it's a lot easier to qualify for nationals now than it was when I did my first nationals in 1996 at Orange County, California. And so yes, you can qualify by going to a local sprint or Olympic distance race that's not that many competitive people show up, win your age group or get top 3 and probably get a slot to nationals. It's one of those things where USA Triathlon, they want people to go. They, sometimes they're just sending you emails. Hey, you qualified. Hey, you qualified. Hey, you qualified. And you get so many emails. And sometimes I'm like, oh, well, what race did I qualify at? Like, it wasn't even on my radar.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, should I go? Should I not go? I think the reason for me to go would be if I wanted to get a slot to the World Championships for Olympic distance race, which I did in 2005. I went to the World Championship in Honolulu, Hawaii. And that was the reason I wanted to go, because it was in Hawaii that year. So anyways, moving on to the reason she could qualify, and she doesn't sound like an experienced elite triathlete because she's not even on a tri-bike, which most elite triathletes are. And when you think of nationals, you think of an elite triathlete. So kudos to her for qualifying, number one. And number two, I understand, people do rent bikes. If, let's say you live on the West Coast and nationals is on the East Coast, and it's a big commitment and monetary value to get a bike box, fly with your bike, etc. Renting a bike is an option. But for a race like Age Group Nationals, I wouldn't want to rent a bike because I'd be going to Age Group Nationals to really be as competitive as I can.
For you.
And I'm going to be as competitive as I can racing on the bike that I train on. So I would say, sure, you can rent a bike. And again, if tri-bikes in your local area are hard to rent, I bet you they're really difficult to rent on race day at a certain race venue because other people are. And since COVID happened in 2020, bikes are just hard to come by. And,
Seriously.
there's still bike parts, labor, everything is really tough. So again, to everyone out there getting ready for a fall race, if you haven't gotten your bike tuned up or if you need any parts, you better order them now because it might take a few weeks for them to get in. So that's just a side note. Number two, the learning curve going from a road bike to a tri bike. I already mentioned earlier in the podcast that I used to slap Aero Bars on my road bike and ride. I don't recommend it. It was a learning curve, but I was very naive and very inexperienced and young. It was like kind of whatever, no big deal to me. But now it would be a big deal to me. And I think the positions of tri-bike versus road bike, the geometry is very different. And so I wouldn't recommend showing up at a race, riding a tri-bike for the first time in a race setting. I don't recommend that either. And so, if you're going to rent a bike, I would try to rent a bike with the same geometry and dimensions as the road bike you're riding now, and just use that race day because that's what you're going to be most comfortable on.
Good feedback. And I'm guessing maybe Michelle, it depends. I don't know what age group she's in, which might make it, she might have a better chance, depends on what age group she's in to qualify. But you're right. When I remember getting a couple of these postcards back in the day when I was racing a lot more during the year, pre-kids, so I could race, almost every other weekend. And just by the nature of participating a lot, I was getting closer and closer. And then a small sprint, I would be in the top three. And then there's my postcard. But it's more expensive to fly to wherever it was, Wisconsin, to do a sprint or an Olympics. Like, it's not worth it, as cool as it is. And then my own pride or ego says, yeah, but it's not really a race I earned because everyone's getting a postcard.
Right.
It didn't seem as special. It's just more of a celebration race. That's fine.
Yeah.
But, I'm more of a lifetime triathlete, so I want to earn things along the way, not like, I did 5 years and I got the Age Group Nationals and then I quit. So for me, hey, no offense. Great, Michelle. Do it. Go. Just ride the bike that you're comfortable with. That's what I think. All right, from Katie. All right, Katie. Katie's 50, and she finished her first sprint. Congratulations. And she was following our Couch to Sprint program, which you can find on Training Peaks. You can also go to endurancehour.com and you'll see all our plans there. Everything was great except the swim. So Kate and I have a couple of things in common. We're both 50 and our swims aren't that great because it was open water. Otherwise, I'm a good swimmer. It was an open water and I didn't practice any open water before my event. This is a sprint. She says the darkness and thoughts really got to me and I finished. Any suggestions on how to overcome this and tips leading up to her Olympic distance next?
Again, a great question, very common among triathletes. Triathletes can be very strong in the pool, and if they've never been in open water, it can be a freak out fest from the beginning. I remember my first race like it was yesterday. I wrote a blog on it, and it was in Great Lakes Triathlon in Michigan. I was a collegiate swimmer. I did the team event, and then I did the event the next year. The water was like warm, 83 degrees, no wetsuits. Probably didn't even know what a wetsuit was back then, never even considered it. But I remember plunging, my first plunge, diving in, and you can't see anything. It was dark, sandy, warm, gross feeling. And it helped me swim as fast as I could. I was a strong swimmer, but I understand that feeling of what lies beneath. Again, another blog I've written called What Lies Beneath, when you can't see anything. There's no lane line. There's bodies all around you. Again, what lies beneath? You don't know what's under there, and that could play tricks with you and really make you mentally unstable. And so, stuff you can do in the pool. Again, I wrote a blog about things you can practice in the pool, and I think I even have a video on the Endurance Hour YouTube channel about it.
Yeah.
Things you can practice in the pool to get you ready for open water in case you don't have access to open water to practice in. Sometimes just swimming with closed eyes. you can't see anything. Swimming with some people in your lane, so you're used to touching each other and bodies swimming over you and you swimming over someone else. Practicing sighting in the pool. And so there's a lot of things you can do, but ultimately you got one under your belt, you experienced open water, you know what your fears and frustrations were, and hopefully moving forward to your Olympic distance race, you will have access or make it a priority to find access to open water swimming before your next event, or go to that endurance hour and watch that YouTube video that I created to give you a little more tips that you can practice on your own. And as far as going from a sprint to Olympic, the main thing about that is, your training volume gets a little bit longer on your longest ride, longest run, longest swim. But for the most part, the Monday through Friday workouts are pretty similar. They're not that much more intense or not that much more volume related, but it's just the longer rides and runs to prep you for double the distance.
Now, the endurancehour.com, we have a couch to Olympic distance program?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
And I have found what problem that I experience, and hopefully this can help with Kate's question, is that I lift my head up to sight too often, which is going to drop my lower body and create more drag and make it a slower race. And one thing I'm going to work on, which I have worked on in the past, but because of my last two experiences, I'm going to do this from now on. I'll try it soon. Is maybe swim 6 to 8 strokes before, and closing my eyes, then look up to see where my body is, to see if I'm veering left or veering right, and how I can correct that. And close my eyes, because when you're out there, if you can keep your head down for 6 to 8 strokes, and while you're breathing, of course, then you'll see if you're going left and right, and you'll limit the amount of times you lift your head up, which will most probably, in some cases, drop your legs and create drag and slow you down. But I know we have a lot of open water swimming tips videos that Wendy did at a lakeside, and then demonstrations and videos. There's tons of them on our channel.
Yeah, I suggest definitely checking out all those tips. And just getting experience goes a long way. Having that one experience really is prepping you a lot for the next one.
Yeah, and then you're just going to build on top of experience, And they're two different beasts, sprint to Olympic. I mean, it's going to seem overwhelming. I know it does. And you look out there going, their buoys are way out there for an Olympic. It seems pretty far. But next thing you know, you're done with the race and move on and have some fun on the bike and run.
Yeah.
We're going to finish off with one more question. And this is from Tim. Wendy, I'm doing Ironman in Chattanooga. And you always say it's good to have a plan post-Ironman. So I'm thinking about that plan. What are your thoughts on doing a marathon 4 weeks after the Ironman?
Well, what do I think? It always depends. Okay, number one, kudos to you for having a plan. I think that's really important. A plan can be you're going to do another race. A plan could be you're going to take time off. A plan could be you're going to travel. A plan could be you're done with triathlon. You never want to do that again. As long as you know what to expect after specifically a long distance event such as a 70.3 or 140.6, because most people put in so much time and energy leading up to this one day, it can be a letdown. People go through post-Ironman depression syndrome, and we've talked about that on other podcasts and videos. But let's talk about what you want to do is a marathon. Mm-hmm. Now, again, it depends. Is Chattanooga going to be your first Ironman or your 10th Ironman? So it really just depends on your experience. And if you have experience, then you understand the recovery process after an Ironman. I think having an event post Ironman, especially if you do have experience, is kind of a backup plan, because anything can happen race day. When I did Chattanooga in 2018, I had a mechanical on the bike, and it just blew the wind off my sails. It was so disheartening to have this bike mechanical, and I ended up having a decent marathon, but still, I was doing so well. I had the mechanical, and that was my last race of the season, and I was done, and I came home and I hung up my bike, and I'm like, okay, my plan was to hit the trails and do some trail running. I'm like, I just need a way from my bike because I was so disappointed. So having a backup plan like that in case something goes wrong with your Ironman experience, then you're like, okay, another race, I've walked the marathon of an Ironman. And while I was walking the marathon, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can get an Ironman Arizona in 6 weeks. just to, have something to look forward to as I'm walking the marathon in Kona. So it is definitely good to have another event planned for that reason. As far as, is it a good idea? If you don't have to sign up for it early, I wouldn't. I would just kind of keep it in the back burner, because you also might have the best experience of your life and your body may be trashed and you might not want to do a marathon 4 weeks later. And so you don't want to force an event when your body and mind are not feeling like they need to do another event for the season. So really, it's good to have that on your mind, but if you don't have to sign up for it yet, I would wait until see how you finish and how you feel after you finish.
Does it seem a little easier and easier to wrap your head around just doing a marathon after you've done a full Ironman? Let's say you're taking 7 to 10 days off to recover. Then you think, oh, I only have to do the marathon next. So I can kind of just, these next week or so is going to be some light running because I'm already fit, but I don't have to worry about the swim and the bike. There's 7 hours right there or more. I can just do a run. I'm already fit.
It is, from a mental standpoint, it is easy to wrap. Oh, you know what? I'm already trained for the Ironman. I can do a marathon. And you can. And at the same time, you may have some niggles or injuries, or not an injury post-Ironman, but you may have a little bit slower recovery time. And if your marathon is 4 weeks later, your body may just be like, no, I don't want to run 26 miles again. I need a little more time. Again, this is based on my personal experience. I've been there, done that. I understand how my body recovers depending on how hard I push an Ironman and how well I do. And it's usually the marathon, whether it's just a marathon or a marathon after 112 miles on the bike, that's what causes the damage. And even if you feel great and you feel recovered a week or two, you may start running and your body may say, not yet. Oh, I got this hip pain, I got this ankle pain, I got this knee pain that I didn't know I had because I haven't run for 2 weeks after my Ironman. But the damage was being made during that Ironman marathon that you might not feel for a couple weeks later. Yeah. So it's just really important to really don't focus on the marathon right now. That's 4 weeks after your Ironman. Put your energy into the Ironman and do as well as you can do with the plan that you might do an Ironman or you might do a marathon 4 weeks later.
Pretty good topics today, and which helps us, look back on our experience and share those stories with you and get some value out of it. So good stuff today. Yeah,
thank you for those who submitted the questions.
For Wendy Mader, Coach Wendy, who is next race for you is Kona, or is there something before then I forgot?
I just signed up for an Olympic distance race. It starts 3/4 of a mile from my home, and that's
nice.
That's called the East Cobb Triathlon. It's a pool swim, and then Olympic distance bike and run.
Are you gonna walk there or ride your bike there for your warm up, or just?
I'll ride my bike there.
Yeah, that makes sense. 3/4 of a mile. That's awesome.
I know.
Super close.
Yeah, I did it last year for the first time. It was really fun, and just being so close. I run by my street, so my husband was waiting at the end of my street, right. So he saw me run, and it's a 3-loop run course, so he could see me a few times. And then he walked to the finish, so he was at the finish line when I finished. And then we walked home together, and I changed, and then I went back for the awards. So it was cool. really convenient.
Wow, like in your backyard, perfect.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Everyone, thanks you so much for listening. This is episode 364. One more, and we got a full year's worth of podcasts. It took me, 10 years to get one, but oh well. 364 is now done. We'll see you next week for 365. For Wendy Mader, I'm Dave Erickson. Have a great week of training, racing, or recovery. Adios.
Adios.